third Isaiah, Isaiah who wrote to encourage the people after they had returned from their exile in Babylon. And then a reading from Paul to the Christians, a very mixed group of Christians, both Gentile Christians and Jewish Christians, who met in Rome. And Andrea will read for us.
Listen to me, you who pursue righteousness, you who seek the Lord. Look to the rock from which you are hewn, and to the quarry from which you are dug. Look to Abraham your father, and to Sarah who bore you. For he was but one when I called him, but I blessed him and made him many. For the Lord will comfort Zion. He will comfort all her waste places, and will make her wilderness like Eden, her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness will be found in her, thanksgiving and the voice of song. Listen to me, my people, and give heed to me, my nation. For a teaching will go out from me, and my justice for a light to the peoples. I will bring near my deliverance swiftly. My salvation has gone out, and my arms will rule the peoples. The coastlands wait for me, and for my arm they hope. Lift up your eyes to the heavens, and look at the earth beneath. For the heavens will vanish like smoke, and the earth will wear out like a garment. And those who live on it will die like gnats. But my salvation will be forever, and my deliverance will never be ended. And Romans 12, 1-8. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, on the basis of God's mercy, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable act of worship. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of yourself more highly than you ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. For as in one body we have many members, and not all the members have the same function, so we, who are many, are one body in Christ, and individually we are members of one another. We have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us: prophecy in proportion to faith, ministry in ministering, the teacher in teaching, the encourager in encouragement, the giver in sincerity, the leader in diligence, the compassionate in cheerfulness.
At the 16th chapter and the 13th verse. Now, when Jesus came to the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, but others Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But who do you say that I am?" he asked. Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was Messiah. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Those of you who read the Methodist newsletter from cover to cover assiduously every month will remember that some years ago I was writing the lectionary notes. For many long years I wrote the lectionary notes. And I want to read you a piece that I wrote when I was dealing with this particular passage a number of years ago. I had to deal with it several years before, and I thought we'll have to do something new. So for that particular month in the lectionary, I took a character in the gospel and I spoke for them. And these are the words I put into the mouth of Simon Peter. It was out of my mouth before I even thought of what I was saying. There are those who would tell you, of course, that this is always the way I operate. A real foot-in-mouth case, that's me. But this time, I do believe that God himself gave me a moment of vision and the words with which to express it openly and without fear. We were in Caesarea Philippi. Now that's quite a place, I can tell you. It was first established as a Greek city, and the god Pan was worshipped there. Then the Romans took it over and named it after one of their emperors. All around you can see marks of majesty and past glory and signs and symbols of different ways of thinking and believing. And then he turns and asks us that question. Well, I mean, there were plenty of things people were saying about him, and some weren't all that flattering, it has to be said. The Pharisees lacked enthusiasm for his ministry. But there were others who seemed to sense something more, a dimension of the holy, you might say. Some of them even thought he might be one of those prophets come back to life again. So that's what we told him. But that wasn't the real question. That was coming. But who do you say that I am? He asked. And that is the real question, isn't it? In the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what anyone else says about him or what they think about him. What matters is who he is to us, to you, to me. There were all sorts of claim on our love and loyalty. Try Caesarea Philippi. Some years later, my colleague Paul noticed this phenomenon in Athens, where they kept their options open by having a spare altar, as it were, addressed to an unknown God. We do know Jesus Christ, however, and it's up to us to say who we think he is. After all, if society is as pluralistic as all that, we have a right and a responsibility to make our voices heard too. So I said what was on my heart. He is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And he said he would build his church on me. Now, that's quite something. I think, however, that what he really meant was not so much on me, but as on the faith that led me to acknowledge who he really is. And that, I believe, is something we all need to take seriously as we witness to him. Passing on the faith is a task of all of us. So I imagined Simon Peter saying. And a lot of what I want to say now will sort of be based on that general idea. This is an incident that was considered so important by the synoptic gospel writers Matthew, Mark and Luke that they each record it. You'll find a version of it in Mark chapter 8 and in Luke chapter 9. But neither Mark nor Luke, interestingly, include the bit about Jesus handing the keys of the kingdom to Peter. They just talk about the confession of Jesus as Lord. Caesarea Philippi is a fascinating place. It's about 40 kilometres north of Lake Galilee, near Mount Hermon. It's where the origins of the River Jordan start. Up there, flow through the Sea of Galilee and then down the Jordan Valley. And it's extremely fertile land, highly desirable place to live. And it was a worship centre for generations. First the god Baal that we read about in the Old Testament, and then Pan, the god Pan from the Greeks, and then an assortment of Roman gods. It was named originally Paneas, after the god Pan, and then renamed Caesarea Philippi by Philip, one of Herod the Great's sons. And it's not to be confused with Caesarea Maritima, where Cornelius had his house, and it's mentioned in Acts. They're two different Caesareas. These Roman Caesars had ideas about themselves. And the gates of hell that are mentioned in this reading from Matthew's Gospel, the gates of hell is actually a cave in Mount Hermon, a cave where Pan used to be worshipped. So when Jesus talks about the gates of hell, they were just over his shoulder. It's a multicultural place, therefore, was with many ideologies, many ways of thinking. And again, as I indicated in that earlier piece, not unlike Athens that Paul would meet later, and where Paul would say, I know who this God is that you say is unknown. And very like today. We're surrounded by so many ideologies, so many different faith concepts, so much secularism, much the same. And there are the two questions in this passage. Who are people saying I am? And who do you say I am? Because who people say Jesus is may very much depend on us. Who you and I say Jesus is a very deeply personal matter. And in this 21st century, we do have both a right and a responsibility to, as the Wesleys said, to offer them Christ. And indeed, Peter, writing to the early Christians, talks about exactly this. The Apostle Peter has 2 letters, as you know, in the New Testament, and they give very practical advice, possibly born out of his own experience, on how Christians should behave. And a verse that I like to quote always, and I certainly quoted it on one of my bookmarks when I was lay leader of the church, is 1 Peter 3:15. 1 Peter 3, verse 15. In your hearts, set apart Christ as Lord. Always be ready to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. It's a very, very powerful, compelling, and challenging verse. And it's great that all those 3 sentences are in the one verse. Set apart Christ as Lord. Be prepared to give an answer for the faith that you have, and do it with gentleness and respect. First, we have to know Jesus. Know Jesus as Lord, not simply as one of a number of prophets, but actually as the promised Messiah. And that's what, in recording this in Matthew's Gospel, Matthew recording this in his Gospel is drumming that into those early Jewish Christians who were just wondering, is this really this young fellow from Nazareth, really the chap that we're looking for? Yes, he is. So you have to know who Jesus is yourself. And then you have always to be prepared, we have always to be prepared to give that answer to people who ask us, what are Christians? You're Methodists. What are Methodists? Are the Methodists the same as Catholics? Do you believe the same as Muslims? They're people who don't know a thing about faith. But are you ready to give an answer? And you know, sometimes we're absolutely not. When I was a chaplain in University College Dublin, several of my colleagues and I set up what we called an interfaith forum. We would meet in the chaplaincy. There was always food, very carefully chosen food, I may say, And we would invite people, put up notices and invite people from all the faiths on campus to come along. And they did. Food draws a lot of people. We used to call it food for soul, food for body. It was the body first and then the soul, I think. But nevertheless, at the version we had, which explored different faiths, Interfaith Forum, we shared ideas from our faith backgrounds. We did not pray together. We did not worship together. But we listened together. And it was really very astonishing on certain subjects how very much we had in common. Attitude to war, attitude to love, attitude to charity, attitude to the marginalised, and so on. But the shocking thing for us as chaplains was how very much more easily Muslims of the different traditions in Islam, Jews, Baha'i, even Sikhs, for we had a few Sikhs in college, were able to talk about their faith, go to their holy book, root out the verses and whatever references they wanted. Whereas the Christians just, and look to us, the chaplains. They simply seemed not to know. And that was deeply humbling and challenging for us. How much do we know about our faith? And how ready are we able to express it? And this is why a number of years ago, the Faith and Order Committee of our church, the Methodist Church in Ireland, brought out this booklet. In fact, it was only about 6 years ago, 5-6 years ago, Methodist Belief. And when the church had this book published, we purposely published a sufficient number for there to be 2 copies for every family in the connection. One to keep on the mantelpiece, or wherever you keep those sort of things, and one to give away to people who asked. Now, I don't know if you have them here anywhere. Have you seen them? Has anyone seen this before?
Yeah.
Good. Do you know if there are any around still, Gillian? Because they are available in Edgehill House, and I'll bring them down next time I'm up there. Because I think it's a very valuable resource in looking at us. Let me read you the chapter headings. Methodism as part of a worldwide church. Methodism as part of the Protestant tradition. The distinctive emphases of Methodist belief. And then bits about the organisation of worship and practical expressions of Methodism. So if you can try and get your hands on a copy or 2 of that book, it is valuable because it does help us, if we feel diffident, if we feel unsure, to express the faith that is in us. Why we believe as we do, why we are people of the Bible, why we are those saved and redeemed by Jesus Christ. And the third thing that Peter says in this particular passage is do it with gentleness and respect. We need to have some sort of idea of the context into which we are speaking. The context we speak into in Ireland is one of deep secularism and disenchantment with the organised church for various historical reasons. It's always also a context into which over recent decades significant numbers of peoples of other faiths have come. It's a very different context from the context in which I grew up as a child and a young person. And we don't speak into that context by battering people over the head with the Bible. We speak into that context with gentleness and respect. That was true for the early church. It's true for us today. And as I pointed out earlier, Matthew is the only person who actually says to Peter, "You are the rock on which I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven." An interesting concept. I was reading in the notes that I get on my computer every morning that traditional pictures of St. Peter carrying the keys will have St. Peter carrying one key which is gold and the other key which is silver. The gold key is the key to the kingdom of heaven. The silver key is the key to earth. And Peter holds the key, we hold the key to both we open the door to all. Because that is what we are about. That is what we as Methodists are about. We are the friends of all and the enemies of none. And we believe that whatever others may say about Jesus, what I say, what each of you says about Jesus, is fundamental. And in knowing that, you are given a key to the opening of the gospel, of the kingdom, to others. And so we thank God for this particular story. We thank God for Peter's outspokenness, because it gets us the answers that we would like to the questions we might like to ask. And we thank God for that.